Just want to make sure I have the settings right here for the stream, because I think by default it defaults to like 480p, and it's not really that helpful. And so I'm streaming in 1080p now. So let me know how the quality is. Welcome. Today is Career Happy Hour, and I'm Andrew Beach. I'm a teacher of self-education, and I'm here every Friday to help you take a look at the past week and set yourself up for a productive next week. Every Friday, 3 o'clock Pacific time, I show up here to answer your questions, to provide guidance and some education on making yourself a better professional through effective communications. Part of that is I feel I'm a teacher of self-education because I've been in career transition 4 times in my career, and some of those by choice, some of those not by choice. And I think a lot of people right now are wrestling with the angst of layoffs. Are they coming? Are they not coming? And what does that mean for me? And it's really hard for me not to provide some advice. And I've learned now to keep quiet when some people just want to share how they're feeling. They don't need any advice. But this session here today is designed for me to give you advice in lieu of us having a conversation together. We may not have an opportunity to actually have some hands-on dialogue, right? So if you met me in person, it's likely I'd be a little more reserved, not share a whole lot, just listen and consume. In these Friday sessions, I'm really here to share some of the ideas and thoughts that I think can help you find better work, professionally speaking, that fits you. Now, fitting you means a lot of different things, and we're not going to go into that part of it here today. But the big thing I'm seeing right now is people are feeling scared, vulnerable, and they're at the will or whim of their company's decision-making process, whether to keep people, whether to not keep people. All those decisions outside your locus of control. There is, however, many things you do control. You control how you respond to this kind of environment. You decide whether or not you polish up your resume or look at your LinkedIn profile. You're in control of who you reach out to and who you network with. These are all things within your control. And it's not uncommon that we feel like we're out of control or these decisions are not part of our capability of influencing. And that's normal. And it's not so much looking at the things you don't control, but looking at the things maybe you do control. Now I control what I consume, whether I start drinking more alcohol or eating more food or coping with the stress in less than healthy ways. And the reason I'm here today really is to share with you some concepts, some ideas on how to advance your cause using this concept of networking. And networking is, I think, something that's been misused, often abused, and people may or may not have a handle on what best practices look like when it comes to networking effectively. And we have occasionally these opportunities to get together and do what I would refer to as book club. You're holding me accountable to read a book. And that book today is Harvey Mackay, I'm not sure what it is. Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. The only networking book you'll ever need. Now, that certainly is subject to interpretation. We've read many other books on networking. And so we're going to continue our efforts here today to get through this book. And for me, it is getting through this book. I'm going to be honest. I'm not the type of person that has discipline to sit through a whole book. Often I'll consume the table of contents. I'll look at sections that are compelling to me and just move on from there. If I get to a point where the book isn't drawing me in or I'm not getting, I got the point, I just don't continue reading it. And so this is a way for me to be accountable to you, where we can have an opportunity together to read this book and see how it will influence or impact who we are, how it will impact how we approach certain things in our networking process, and to maybe just get a little bit better at being a resource rather than demanding a resource. So it is in the United States here today that one time in the year, well, actually probably more than one time in a year, this is Veterans Day. And on Veterans Day, we honor those who have served. And so the title of today's stream, I think, is somewhat apropos, is that no one's left behind. So in networking, the concept of this no one's left behind means that if you see somebody struggling, see how you can support them. If you run into a situation where you are vulnerable and have been laid off, and someone says, hey, reach out to me if there's anything you can help me with. Now, the challenge I have for you there is reaching out to them, to ask them to help you find a job, maybe a heavy ask, a big lift for them. Instead, what you might want to do is, I really need to get better at networking. Would you help me practice? I've developed a branding statement. Would you help me practice my branding statement? I've built a LinkedIn profile. Would you take a look at it? As you go through this process of networking and building relationships during a job search, start with the low-hanging fruit, the easy ask first, because the big ask is find me a job. Wow, I think all of us are dealing with inflation and political strife and all these different things. Now you want me to find you a job? That may not be an appropriate ask. So let's see how we can use this concept of networking not only to our benefit, but to help others, which really is the idea behind this. So let's continue we're on page 181. I can't believe we read that many pages so far. I think we have about 100 pages to go, but let's start here. Chapter 43, the best place to find a helping hand is at the end of your arm. The two most significant developments in networking over the last few years have been the emergence of the internet as a networking tool. I think this is, again, where we need to pause and say, okay, this was written in the 90s. So internet was just coming online. I think I got my first corporate email in the mid 90s. So CC mail, if you all remember, and Lotus, I think that was a Lotus CC mail. Anyway, back in the day. And so we've come a long way, and LinkedIn is evidence of that. And the growth of non-traditional networks, particularly those for the benefit of minorities and women. That is so true. I mean, the internet has really made the world just a little bit smaller, and you can now access things that you couldn't access before very easily without a lot of time, energy, and money to gather people in a place physically or try to identify people by accident or referral. It was just really hard. So between LinkedIn and Meetup and Eventbrite and all these tools we have now to find through Google search these different networks is certainly a lot easier than it was back in the day. The new networks are part of the ongoing democratization of our national power structure. The old boys network is still firmly in control, but more and more people who don't conform to the prototype are grabbing for the steering wheel by developing networks of their own. Good point. I mean, we can all develop a network of our own choosing. There's a lot of people that you'll find on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or TikTok or who cares really. There's an opportunity there for you to find people that have similar values, similar views. And what you'll find is you start talking to them about those similar values or views, and you'll start to say, well, what do you do for a living? And well, I do this or that, or I have this skill and that sort of thing. And I'm looking for my next great opportunity. The New York Times recently ran a story about Black business networking. They included the National Black MBA Association, the National Minority Supplier Development Council, the National Association of Black Women Entrepreneurs, and the National Association of Black Architects. There are now 150 of these groups, nearly double the number in 1981. Because the system is not user-friendly, says Jacqueline Dickens, who runs a consulting firm with her husband, African Americans and other people of color cannot afford to wait until someone adopts them. They must do something active and proactive. They must cause upper-level white male managers who have connections with people in high places to mentor and sponsor them. One wise mentor took a young African American vice president at JP Morgan under his wing and wanted to help him learn the cultural rituals of the white power structure. He urged him to take up golf. The article doesn't tell us whether he also advised him to follow the ancient prescript, never beat the boss. Affinity groups exist for every racial, religious, gender, educational, and occupational preference. If you're, say, a Hispanic female civil engineer with a degree from Purdue, I count Hispanic female civil engineer and Purdue as 4 ready-made networks. Of course, there's no reason to limit yourself if you also like jazz, write poetry, garden, and jog. You've got 4 more, and that are based strictly on interest rather than background. So interest and background, this is a way that you can have a commonality, an affinity, an icebreaker to reach out to somebody if you have something in common that way. LinkedIn makes this really easy because you can search by university, who attended the university you went to, who worked at the company you worked in, who's a member of a group that you're a part of. So you can find that information for a lot of people. Mackay's maxim: of course, networking is work, but nobody ever said it can't be fun too. That's so true. I met a gentleman today. We meet 3-4 times a year, and we have great conversation and just catch up. And there's really low stakes, right? We have our hands open, and so those are the best kinds of conversations. Incubate those relationships that you want to incubate, the people you like to be around. That doesn't mean you have to. Not everybody gets the same cachet or preference or time in your investment from you, but they, certainly there's people that you want to create some kind of a cadence with, because you don't want to be the person that calls up one day, 3 years from now, and find out the person you've reached out to has actually passed away. Chapter 44, the network right in your own backyard. Neighbors make up one affinity group that is often overlooked. In this drive-through day and age, those people who live up and down the same street you do, neighbors are part of your network. And unless you're the Unabomber, some of you will have to look that up, you're going to have a certain amount of contact with them, like it or not, and a certain number of shared concerns. What are our shared concerns? Well, what about the schools or the streets or the noise or taxes or crime or zoning or pets and so on? Most of the problems that arise from these subjects will come as a big fat surprise to the new homeowner. Although it only makes common sense to do your due diligence before you make one of the most important purchases of your life, I hate to estimate the percentage of people who leap before they look and buy a new house. Oh, the real estate agent didn't tell you about the new halfway house for derelicts on mind-bending drugs that's going to be next door to you. How odd. Don't wait for the housewarming party to meet your new neighbors. Start your network before you sign the purchase agreement. Over a period of 35 years, Carol Ann and I have bought or rented half a dozen homes. Each time before we bought, we would go door to door knocking together. After all the usual pleasantries, or even more revealing unpleasantries, we'd ask the questions. I'm sure you know them. How are the schools? Are there enough kids of the same ages as our kids to play with? Any crime problems? What are the people in the neighborhood like? Anything going on that might affect the neighborhood, like a zoning change? And the clincher, what would make you want to move from this neighborhood? That's a good one, actually. So you notice all of those questions are kind of left to interpretation, but they're, you want to ask some open-ended questions to create dialogue. I can think of a lot of homes we did not buy because of the hidden liabilities that those questions uncovered. A railroad that was blocks away, yet still a noise problem at 4 a.m. An elementary school that was in turmoil over the curriculum, and a violent and quarrelsome couple whose domestic brawls often spilled out onto their front lawn. You are not going to catch those nasty divots in the happy hollow landscape when you're cruising through on a Sunday afternoon. A little legwork can save you a lot of heartache. And so if you took something out of this particular example, a little legwork can save you a lot of heartache. When you're looking at a new organization and you're doing it from a position of networking, you can ask a lot of these same questions. So just like going to your neighbor, you're not asking questions about the neighborhood because you want to move there. You're asking questions about their company and what is it like to work there? How long have they worked there? And what do they like about it? What do they wish was different? So when we're looking at the questions we ask, it really makes a big difference in what you ask and how you ask it to get the right answers to know whether or not that's a place you even want to consider being employed. Before, just like in buying a home, before you sign that purchase agreement, you're going to ask these questions. Before you make an application or take an interview or those sorts of things, wouldn't you want to know this prior to that process? I think I would. Good. So where do we go? A little legwork can save you a lot of heartache. There's another benefit. Wherever it is you do finally decide to buy your home, you've jump-started your neighborhood network. You don't have to knock on the door after your purchase and introduce yourself. Been there, done that. There is, however, one sure way to destroy your neighborhood network and possibly your neighborhood overnight. The night your kid graduates from high school and you decide to host a party after the psychiatric examination, if you are certified as sufficiently sane to resume functioning in society, there are two things you must do. Must do. Hire security. This is where you call your cop network friend and hire a couple of off-duty cops. And for God's sakes, be sure to invite all your neighbors. As long as they're going to be up all night anyway, they might as well have a front row seat. Noise from the band, noise from the kids, congestion, cars parked on lawns, unseeming activity and inappropriate behavior, other things, terrible things you never dreamed possible at Happy Hollow. Don't worry, they'll get you back just as soon as their kids graduate. Mackay's maxim: dig your well deep, you may need to dive into it. That's good. Chapter 45. Come on in. No shark sightings today. In case you didn't know, Harvey Mackay, he also wrote Swim with the Sharks. Swim with the Sharks? Anyway, you could probably look up all the books that he's written. It's relatively easy to develop an open give and take with friends. It's harder with acquaintances. But what about customers? They're part of your network too, and they deserve to be heard and listened to. Several years ago, I was the keynote speaker at a meeting arranged by Corning, the glassware people, for their top 500 customers. Corning is a $4.8 billion company, my suspicion, bigger than that today, with a proud history. More tourists visit the Corning Glass Museum each year than go to Niagara Falls, 140 miles up the road. 15 minutes before I was to go on, the national sales manager took the stage. He asked the audience to reach under their seats where they would find a handheld remote control device. The lights dimmed, a screen lowered behind him, and a series of multiple choice questions appeared. The questions were designed to determine what Corning's customers thought of the company and its products. Wow. So that's like a live poll. Man, that could really go wrong, couldn't it? The questions were designed to determine what they thought about the company and its products. The customers were asked about price, service, quality, performance, variety, features, virtually everything that could have an impact on their buying decisions. You will have total anonymity and confidentiality, said the sales manager. This is not a love-in. We want your honest opinion. Wow, that's bold. I'll tell you that. The questions rolled by. It was a push a button, give a grade rating from 1 to 10, as I recall. Now comes the amazing part. When the questions had been completed, Corning displayed the results to the audience. It was pretty. Some of the responses had to have been embarrassing to the company. Many others were very positive, but it took a lot of guts for Corning to hang their dirty linen out to dry in front of their customers, their best customers. No matter, the sales manager was effusive and in his thanks. You have given exactly what we asked for and exactly what we needed, he said. Honesty. We intend to deal with you in the same way, with honesty, to try to correct those that concern you, to never stop attempting to improve, to do everything within our power to win your approval and your business. We can't survive without you, and the only way we can survive with you is to meet your needs. See, this is where I think networking and sales are very similar. Is when I'm networking, I'm not talking about my needs, not that they're not part of the conversation, but if it's in my control, I'm going to focus on the other person's needs. We thank you for the perception, your insights, your willingness to tell it like it is. We hear you. Now I would like to present our featured speaker. Well, believe me, that was the toughest act I've ever had to follow. I've been a peddler since the snake sold Eve the apple, but that was the first time I saw customers who were ready to climb over their chairs to place their orders. What's networking? Most of the time, it's pretty pedestrian. I'll help you, you help me. However, on too many occasions, it doesn't reach the level of an honest exchange. And it's honesty what we all need the most, isn't it? Mackay's maxims. The riches of the world pale in comparison to the value of an honest opinion. So if you're that person for someone else that's maybe been laid off or struggling in the marketplace, with a little bit of sensitivity and empathy, you might want to give that person an honest opinion on how they can be better. Up to you, of course. Chapter 46, Marilyn Nelson's networking story, how we got to the Super Bowl. Introduction. What hasn't Marilyn Nelson What hasn't Marilyn Nelson done? She currently serves on a dozen volunteer boards, a dozen. That's just currently, because there have been many more over the years. Marilyn also serves on the boards of such household names as Exxon, First Bank System, and US West. Of course, some of those companies are no longer in business, but have been acquired. Her lengthy list of awards is studded with such tributes as caring and service and leadership and community. She's even received the equivalent of a knighthood from the King of Sweden and a similar award from the President of Finland. She has no equal as a truly generous, devoted, untiring volunteer. She's also warm and witty and always great to be around. Marilyn is vice chair of the privately held Carlson Companies, a $12 billion enterprise headquartered in Minneapolis. Her father, Kurt Carlson, recently announced that he intends to turn over the reins to Marilyn. Yes, it's the same Kurt Carlson who is Minnesota's most famous billionaire businessman. But listen up. Kurt is not the type who would turn over a hot dog stand, much less a multi-billion-dollar business, to his offspring if she couldn't cut it. She can, and she's proved it many times over. Here's what she told me. Marilyn Nelson's networking story. As Harvey has pointed out, I'm just a girl who can't say no. I like being a volunteer, and I like being with other volunteers. Volunteers are charged with energy. Their projects do a lot of good in the community and can be fun too. I came to know Minnesota Governor Rudy Perpich when I chaired Scandinavia Today on behalf of the National Endowment of the Arts and Humanities. Since one thing usually holds to another, particularly when you have a reputation for doing volunteer work, I must have made it to the governor's Rolodex. He asked me to chair Minnesota's Super Bowl bid. What I know about football can be put on a very, very small unSuper Bowl. But I do know something about promotions and enthusiasm and just plain old putting on the glitz. It takes a network, a really, really big network. Like the governor's, my Rolodex is no slouch either. There are 5,000 names on it representing every cross-section of the community, from police to bureaucrats to dance bands to window painters, bakers, bankers, even ice castle builders. We needed all of them for this party. How do you get 100,000 visitors in Minnesota in January? That's a good question. Why, you call it the Great Minnesota Warm-Up. That's interesting. And you enlist an army-sized network of talented, supercharged volunteers to keep that thermometer perking. The volunteers move smoothly from their previous roles, parading with Scandinavian flags, to parading with Super Bowl t-shirts, from singing Scandinavian national anthems to singing football fight songs. Well, we got the Super Bowl. There was no blizzard that day either, thanks in no small part to the heartfelt prayers of millions of Minnesotans. And many people who go to every one of these events said it was the best organized Super Bowl they have ever attended. Our network is so strong, I believe we could organize a global event within days if necessary. Anyone in need of a 10,000 voice choir, just let us know. Let the games begin. Just practicing. What Marilyn left out was a key part of the story because she is so humble. It is all very well and good to put in infrastructure in place to handle the Super Bowl. It is quite another to convince the owners that they want me to come to Minnesota in January to watch the game. Most people would have begun by lobbying the commissioner of the National Football League, Paul Tagliabue, to get him to award Minnesota the site. But as Marilyn intuitively understood, that wasn't the way things are done in the NFL. The key man to see first was the then owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, Norman Brayman, who was the head of the Super Bowl site selection committee. Marilyn dispatched me to see him, and then, at her direction, the committee took the extra step. We went and lobbied each of the 27 other owners individually. When it came time for them to vote, it was all over but the shouting. Minnesota would be hosting its first Super Bowl. Mackey's Maxim. You can't get anything done, no matter how good your network, unless you understand the process. The process. So what is the process? What is the process for you to build enough credibility within your network connections that they would want to promote you inside their organization or with their own network, right? That's the barometer. So you have to determine yourself, what is the barometer of success? Chapter 47, don't forget the ones you've left behind. Don't forget or underestimate the power of people who have recently left the company or organization you have in common. Just because they've moved on is no reason to yank their cards. In fact, there's a reasonably good chance they'll become even more valuable members of your network. Whenever new connections they make may well be connections you currently don't have. There's another situation you might want to think about too. That's when a couple you've been close to gets divorced. Not infrequently, both former partners disappear socially off the radar screen so far as their old network is concerned. Often it's awkward for them to try to keep up these friendships as individuals with half of the team gone. In my opinion, the intact couple should at least make separate social overtures to each member of the divorced couple. Don't abandon your friends just because their situation changes, even when it changes for the worse. Life goes on. They'll need you probably more than ever. And so that's a pretty extreme example. Being laid off or separating from an organization beyond your control. I think that's a lot like divorce. You're separating a family, especially if you've been in that organization and around those people a long time. It's the one place you spend more time, perhaps maybe than your family, but most of your waking hours might be at the office. So divorce is a lot like layoffs, right? There's a grieving process. Mackay's maxim: out of sight doesn't have to mean out of mind. People drop out of sight for reasons, usually the wrong reasons: job loss, illness, divorce. Don't let them get too far away. Chapter 48, teach your subordinates about the power of networking. Tim was a young life insurance salesman. He came from a blue-collar background, and his primary network consisted of the bachelor beer-drinking buddies on his softball team. Of his three best friends, one worked at the Ford assembly plant, one at a service station, and the other was between jobs. Tim's boss, Walter, was a great insurance salesman with good contacts in the moneyed community. Walter had grown up in a country club environment and graduated from an Ivy League school. His classmates and friends were upper middle class professionals whose lives were as remote from Tim's world as the other side of the moon. When Walter developing a training program for Tim, he neglected to allow for the difference in their backgrounds. Walter couldn't understand why Tim couldn't sell the big policies. It was no surprise that Tim didn't make it in insurance. He didn't have a network, and he wasn't properly coached on how to develop one or in how to deal with people who came from different backgrounds. Tim was bright and personable. He just wasn't handled right. His next job was with a utility company. The utility put Tim through an intensive, too-much training course that grounded him in the fundamentals of the business, but most important, furnished him with information about the prospects and customers. It didn't matter who Tim's friends were. It mattered how well he could develop relationships once he had a solid start. He became very successful. Could Tim have made it in life insurance? Sure. Many successful insurance salespeople didn't go to Harvard or belong to the social register. Tim just needed someone other than a stuffed shirt like Walter to show him the ropes. A second example will hammer the point home. Jack was another blue-collar type. In the home where he had grown up, the drinking glasses had begun life as jam jars. Jack was trying to work his way through college with a minimum wage type job, and he just wasn't making it. In desperation, he decided to take on a second job. He answered an ad in the college newspaper for direct sales work selling aluminum cookware. The market was young working women away from home for the first time. The entire sales force consisted of young, good-looking male college students. Jack quickly learned that there was more to selling pots and pans to single women than being able to explain the relationship between the gauge of aluminum and the conductivity of heat. In this situation, the chemistry between salesman and prospect was a lot more important Then the metallurgy. Jack was a hard worker, an eager learner, and he had good people skills. Here we go. He was trained in prospecting as the key to building a successful sales career. It was hammered home to him that whether you made the sale or not, each sales call must produce 3 more leads. Jack was so good at it that he was able to quit his other job, and he made enough money to get him through college. He even married a woman he met when he was peddling his pots and pans, even though he never even bought a pot holder, even though she never even bought a pot holder from me. After college, Jack decided to make selling a full-time career. His boss was Milt, who, like Walter, was a great insurance salesman. But unlike Walter, Milt knew that most insurance people fail not because they don't know how to sell, but because they don't know how to prospect. For months, Milt took Jack with him to meetings, to clubs, and to every other place there were people who could buy his product. Since Milt was old enough to be Jack's father, he reasoned that some of his friends' children would be prospects for Jack. It took a little while, but Jack steadily developed a network. Milt had taught him how to move in circles that could afford to buy from him. But Jack made his own luck. Milt has since died. That's sad. But in the last 15 years or so of his life, he was semi-retired and he worked for Jack. The agency is Jack's now, and he has a sizable sales force working for him. Are you a manager? If you are, you know that your results depend largely on the contributions of your subordinates. They'll do a much better job if they're good networkers. Don't forget to tell them they'll also be helping their own careers too. Mackay's maxim: teaching subordinates to network is one of the best investments in your future you'll ever make. And by the way, is your boss doing the same for you? Good question. Mackay's 2-for-1 special maxim: you can build a network with any set of tools as long as you know how to use them. Any competent carpenter can build a house, but no 2 carpenters have the same toolkit. That's a good one. Chapter 49, networks for sale. You need high-level advice and you don't have the high-level contacts who can give it. Solution: hire the network you need. I had to do that when I first went into business for myself. By that time, I was pretty knowledgeable about sales and marketing. I'd spent 5 years selling envelopes, and I could do it in my sleep. But who wants to spend the major portion of their waking hours sleepwalking? I wanted to run my own show instead of working for someone else. I scraped together every dime I had and went into hawk for what seemed like the rest of my life to buy a nearly bankrupt envelope manufacturing company and a few broken down machines that went with it. If you're in manufacturing, there are 2 concepts that you have to master. 1, making your goods at the lowest price possible without sacrificing quality. And 2, selling those goods at a higher price than it costs you to make them. Simple, right? Then why, after 3 years, did I find myself teetering on the edge of chapter 11? I was doing it all right on number 1, but number 2 had me on the ropes. In those 3 years, I had gone through 3 factory managers, and I still couldn't knock out an envelope and sell it at a profit. So I decided to try to find a consultant who could help me out. Of course, hire a consultant when you don't have the answers. My reasoning was this: there are 200 competing envelope companies in the country. None of them was about to give me a plant tour. I had no formal engineering background. I had no network of spies to tell me what the other guys were doing right, that I was doing wrong. The right cost specialist consulting firm probably had been in at least 25 of my competitors' plants. I could either put on a fright wig and a putty nose and try to walk my way into them as an OSHA inspector, or I could just buy that knowledge. Machine speeds, output per hour, rejection rates, productive capacity, waste. What does a guy like me know about this stuff? It would have taken me half a lifetime to comprehend what I needed to meet my own needs. I had to have an expert, so I bought one. I asked everyone in my then meager network to suggest a consulting firm, and the name that kept popping up was Spencer Tucker and Associates. 30 years later, my Spencer Tucker and Associates cost system still lives at Mackay Envelope. The system has been profitable every year since it was installed. This consulting firm has now worked with more than 75 envelope manufacturers and eventually became, in my opinion, the #1 advisor in my industry. My own network couldn't provide me with the technical answers I needed, but it did help me connect with an outfit that had the network that I could. They were worth every penny. Good advice is never cheap, Cheap advice is never good. Maybe you need help to find a new job, locate a house, advise on investments, improve your professional skills. It's certainly nice when you can turn to your network and get it for free, but sometimes you can't. Better to hire the best advice you can at any stage of your career. Too often you'll get what you pay for. Mackey's maxim: you can't always be an expert. You can't always know an expert, but you can always hire an expert. So that finishes up step 6. We'll do step 7 next time, which says don't fall in. Again, the book is Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. If you want to follow along with us, you can certainly do that. But hey, I'm here to support your success. And if you have questions, please leave those in the chat or the comments. I'm happy to answer. I even monitor these comments after the fact. So thank you for joining us this Friday Career Happy Hour on Veterans Day. And we'll see you next Friday.